The Italian War 1521-26 was a defining conflict in the long struggle for dominance between the House of Valois and the House of Habsburg. King Francis I of France, a monarch known for his patronage of the arts and his martial ambition, was determined to assert his claims in Italy. His great rival, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, controlled a vast and sprawling empire that encircled France. The primary theater of their conflict was the rich and fragmented landscape of northern Italy, particularly the coveted Duchy of Milan. In the late autumn of 1524, Francis led a powerful French army across the Alps, a force of over 26,000 men. His immediate objective was to recapture Milan, but the main imperial army, under Fernando d'Avalos, the Marquis of Pescara, eluded him. Instead of pursuing, Francis made the fateful decision to besiege the heavily fortified city of Pavia. Pavia was held by a small but resolute imperial garrison of 9,000 men, mostly German Landsknechte, commanded by the veteran Antonio de Leiva. The siege began in October, dragging on through the harsh winter months. The French army constructed extensive lines of circumvallation and contravallation, effectively sealing Pavia from the outside world. Inside the city, supplies dwindled, and the garrison suffered from hunger and disease, but their morale never broke. De Leiva famously remarked that he would eat the last rat before he surrendered. Meanwhile, an imperial relief army was being assembled, commanded by the Viceroy of Naples, Charles de Lannoy, This army also included the formidable Marquis of Pescara and the renegade Charles III, Duke of Bourbon, who had turned against Francis I. By late January 1525, the imperial army arrived, camping on the eastern side of the French siege lines. For 3 weeks, the two armies faced each other in a tense standoff, separated by the French fortifications. The imperial commanders knew they could not afford a prolonged stalemate, as their funds were running out and their mercenaries were growing restless. They decided on a daring plan: to march around the French lines under the cover of darkness and attack from an unexpected direction. Their target was the vast walled hunting park, the Parco Visconteo, which lay to the north of the city. On the night of February 23rd, Imperial engineers began to quietly breach the park walls. The noise of their work was masked by a strong wind and the rumble of a diversionary bombardment against the city's southern gates. By dawn on February 24th, Francis I's birthday, a significant portion of the Imperial army had slipped inside the park. French pickets discovered the breach and raised the alarm, but the initial reports were confused. Francis I, believing it was merely a small raid, was slow to grasp the scale of the imperial maneuver. The imperial plan was to form up inside the park and march south to resupply Pavia, forcing the French to fight on ground of their choosing. However, the dense woods and morning fog caused the imperial units to lose cohesion and stumble upon French defensive positions. Artillery batteries, placed by the French to guard the park, opened fire, causing chaos among the advancing imperial columns. It was at this critical moment that Francis I made his second, and more disastrous, error. Seeing the imperial forces in apparent disarray, he ordered a massive, all-out cavalry charge. He personally led the elite French gendarmes, the flower of the French nobility, in a thunderous assault. The charge was initially successful, smashing through the Spanish cavalry and scattering them. However, in his eagerness, Francis had masked his own artillery, forcing them to cease fire for fear of hitting their own men. This allowed the imperial infantry to recover and reform their lines. The Marquis of Pescara had deployed his 1,500 Spanish arquebusiers with deadly foresight. These musketeers, sheltered by the uneven, wooded terrain, took aim at the magnificent, unmissable target of the French heavy cavalry. The arquebusiers unleashed a devastating volley fire, a storm of lead that ripped through the ranks of the gendarmes. Knights and horses, encumbered by their heavy armor, fell in droves. The charge, which had begun with such promise, faltered and then broke apart in bloody confusion. Pride of French chivalry was systematically annihilated by the disciplined firepower of the Spanish infantry. Meanwhile, the German Landsknecht in Imperial service clashed with their Swiss mercenary counterparts in the French army. The Swiss, renowned for their pike formations, found themselves outmaneuvered and unsupported. With the French cavalry destroyed and their flank threatened by arquebusiers, the Swiss phalanx began to crumble. Their retreat quickly turned into a rout, a desperate flight for survival. At the same time, Antonio de Leyva led the starved garrison of Pavia in a sortie, attacking the French siege lines from the rear. The French army, now assailed from two directions, completely disintegrated. In the midst of the carnage, King Francis fought with the courage of a lion. His horse was killed from under him, and he was left fighting on foot, surrounded by enemy soldiers. Wounded and exhausted, he refused to surrender to the Spanish soldiers who had surrounded him. He would only yield to the Imperial commander, Charles de Lannoy, who arrived and accepted his sword with a respectful bow. The capture of the French king sent shockwaves across Europe. The battle had lasted only a few hours, but it was one of the most decisive in history. The French army was not just defeated, it was annihilated. Thousands of French soldiers were killed or captured, including many of the highest-ranking nobles of the kingdom. The imperial losses, in contrast, were astonishingly light, numbering only in the hundreds. Francis says, "I was taken to a nearby monastery, where he was held under guard." He famously wrote to his mother, Louise of Savoy, with the line, "Of all things, nothing remains to me but honor and life, which is safe." Soon after, he was transported to imprisonment in Spain, first to Barcelona and then to Madrid. His captivity became a major diplomatic crisis, as Charles V sought to extract the maximum possible concessions from his rival. After a year of difficult negotiations, Francis was forced to sign the humiliating Treaty of Madrid in January 1526. He renounced his claims to Italy, Flanders, and Artois, and ceded the Duchy of Burgundy to Charles V. To secure his release, he was also forced to leave his two young sons as hostages in Spain. However, upon returning to France, Francis I had the treaty declared null and void by the Parliament of Paris. He argued that a treaty signed under duress was not binding. The war soon resumed, but the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The Battle of Pavia marked the end of the French dream of Italian conquest and the beginning of a long period of Habsburg dominance in Italy. It also signaled a revolution in military affairs, where the age of chivalric heavy cavalry was brought to an end by the effectiveness of firearms. The disciplined use of the arquebus had proven to be the decisive factor on the battlefield. Capture of a king in battle was a rare and momentous event, a profound humiliation for the French monarchy. The day belonged to the Emperor Charles V, whose commanders had executed a brilliant and audacious plan. The fields around Pavia were silent now, bearing witness to a victory that would shape the political map of Europe for generations. The prelude to the battle was a complex dance of diplomacy and military posturing across Italy. Francis believed his personal presence on the battlefield would inspire his troops to certain victory. The imperial garrison in Pavia was on the brink of starvation, their pay long in arrears. Antonio de Leyva's leadership was a beacon of hope for the beleaguered defenders. The French sea works were a marvel of military engineering, considered nearly impenetrable. The Imperial commanders, Pescara and Lannoy, often disagreed on strategy, but were united in their objective. The night march of the Imperial army was a tremendous gamble, risking detection at every moment. A breach in the park wall was made just wide enough for cavalry to pass through in single file. The morning fog was a double-edged sword, providing cover but also causing immense confusion. The French were confident in their superior numbers and the quality of their heavy cavalry. The sound of the first arquebus volley was a death knell for the age of chivalry. Many French nobles died around their king, refusing to flee and abandon him. The Duke of Bourbon, fighting for the Imperials, allegedly wept at the sight of the French nobility's destruction. The Swiss mercenaries' reputation for invincibility was shattered in the muddy fields of Pavia. The sortie from the city was perfectly timed, turning the French flank into a death trap. Francis's surrender was a moment of profound, quiet dignity amidst the chaos. News of the victory spread slowly at first, then like wildfire across the courts of Europe. In England, Henry VIII ordered celebrations, saying an opportunity to press his own claims against France. The Pope, Clement VII, was thrown into a state of alarm, fearing the unchecked power of the Emperor. Francis's imprisonment in Madrid was harsh, and he fell gravely ill at one point. His sister, Marguerite de Navarre, traveled to Spain to plead for his release and care for him. The exchange of the royal princes for their father on the Bidasoa River was a somber, formal affair. The battle's legacy was cemented not just in treaties, but in the evolution of warfare itself. The individual heroism of the knight was now subordinate to the collective discipline of the infantry. Pavia became a byword for decisive, catastrophic defeat. The memory of the captured king would haunt the French monarchy for decades to come. The French army's supply lines were overstretched, making them vulnerable. The Landsknechte were professional soldiers, fighting for whichever lord could pay them. The decision to attack was born of desperation on the Imperial side. The French artillery, under the command of Galliot de Genouillac, was considered the best in Europe. Francis's charge effectively silenced his greatest advantage on the field. The arquebusiers reloaded with remarkable speed, maintaining a near-constant fire. The terrain of the park, with its trees and streams, was ideal for skirmishing infantry. The French infantry, composed largely of mercenaries and militia, lacked the cohesion of the imperial forces. The death of the Seigneur de la Palisse, a veteran French commander, was a major blow to morale. River Ticino behind the French army cut off their primary route of escape. Many fleeing French soldiers drowned, trying to cross the river to safety. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of utter desolation and plunder. Charles V received the news of his victory with quiet piety, attributing it to God. The political landscape of Italy was redrawn in a single morning. The battle became a case study for military theorists for centuries. The personal rivalry between Francis and Charles fueled much of the conflict. The Siege of Pavia represented a significant investment of French resources and prestige. The Imperial Army's lack of pay was a constant threat to its discipline. The element of surprise was the cornerstone of the Imperial strategy. The French camp was overly confident, celebrating their king's birthday on the eve of battle. The arquebus, once a clumsy and unreliable weapon, had been perfected by the Spanish. The French gendarmes were the epitome of late medieval heavy cavalry, powerful but inflexible. The collapse of the French center sealed the fate of their entire army. King Francis's personal bravery was undeniable. but his generalship was flawed. The battle's outcome was a testament to the tactical genius of the Marquis of Pescara. The road to Madrid was a journey of humiliation for the captive French king. The Treaty of Madrid was a victor's peace, designed to cripple France permanently. The repudiation of the treaty was inevitable, ensuring that the struggle would continue. Pavia marked a turning point, the end of one age and the bloody birth of another. The echoes of the arquebus shots at Pavia would resound on battlefields for the next century. The French nobility's sacrifice was both tragic and ultimately futile. The Imperial victory was so complete, it almost destabilized the European power balance entirely. The battle's narrative is a timeless story of hubris, desperation, and technological change. The walls of the Parco Visconteo, breached that fateful morning, still stand in places today. The fate of nations was decided by a few crucial hours in a foggy park. The capture of Francis remains one of the most dramatic events of the Renaissance.